Trellis for Tomorrow is a nonprofit organization. We generally use organic gardens and farms as living classrooms to teach what I like to say is students of all ages, workforce readiness skills, life skills, behavioral skills, and really like how to grow food and why the connection between us and where our food comes from matters.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. So we're here with David Ryle, the Director of Programs for Trellis Tomorrow. David, thanks so much for coming in. You guys were one of the finalists for our nonprofit grant, and we wanted to have you on the show to help kind of share what you guys are doing. Why don't you give us an intro to Trellis for Tomorrow and the work you guys do?
Absolutely. And first of all, I'll just say what a tremendous honor it is to be an awardee of this grant and to be interviewed by you for this. So thank you, first of all, for having us out. That's really great. So Trellis for Tomorrow is a nonprofit organization based in Phoenixville, and we've been working in the area, really the region, for about 23 years. So since 2003, so almost 23 years now. And our work is really focused on youth development, sustainable agriculture, and community building. And what that means in real terms is that we generally use organic gardens and farms as living classrooms to teach what I like to say is students of all ages, workforce readiness skills, life skills, behavioral skills, and really like how to grow food and why the connection between us and where our food comes from matters. And in the process of all of that work, we tend to grow a tremendous amount of food, which gets into the community where it's really needed right now. So we have about 35 partner gardens across 5 counties, with about 1,000 volunteers managing those gardens. And every year, those gardens grow about 45 to 50,000 pounds of organic produce that gets to people that need it. So I think it's a very meaningful mission, and I love working there.
That's amazing. How did the whole thing get started?
That's a great question. So 23 years ago in 2003, our founders really had a vision for something very similar to what I just described, but they believed that there was space for nonprofit work that focused on youth development, entrepreneurship, and learning business skills and social impact. And so some of what they did in the beginning was really focused on using some gardens as spaces to do that work. But there was also a lot of work that was more strictly kind of like focusing on building entrepreneurship skills, sort of isolated from all that. And some of the programs that we did in the early days were really incredible, and some of them did really great, and some of them were kind of like a hit or miss. And over the years, as we've kind of moved into a little bit more of a maturity as a nonprofit, in the last 10 years, we've gotten really focused. And the entrepreneurship piece is still a big part of what we're doing, but we've gotten really focused on those 3 things that I just said. Like, how do these 3 things really intersect in a meaningful way? And everywhere we go, we're seeing people get really engaged in this space. And one of the things that we like to say is that in a community garden, one of the greatest things that can be grown is community itself. It's also one of the hardest things to grow these days. So community doesn't come naturally to people. But we see it over and over. I just am coming to this podcast from one of our garden locations where we had a couple dozen volunteers show up to learn how to harvest Napa cabbage and how to process that and how to get it to places that it's needed. And some of the volunteers have said, like, I come back over and over because it's so meaningful for me, and we watch community growing in the process. But now I'm kind of like on a rabbit trail. But basically, we started out sort of like with a bit of a wider focus. And over the years, we've gotten really focused on those 3 things that I said at the top.
So I'm curious, what do you think it is about gardening that makes it the mechanism that you guys choose to teach these skills to kids?
What a great question. Part of me feels like it's kind of just magical and mysterious in that way. Like, I don't know what it is that makes that so effective, but what I can say is that in more real terms, I think that it provides for our students, and I'm thinking about our youth, but really it's our adults too, like an unscreened experience of the world around them. So much of our time now is we've got a screen between us and reality. And gardens kind of provide this opportunity to get your hands like in the soil and to engage directly with nature and to learn some things that, frankly, 150 years ago, everybody had access to organic food. and very few people ate processed food. Everybody was familiar with how things grew, more or less. And we've come a long way from that. That's kind of the exception to the rule now. So when we talk about using gardens to engage students of all ages, I think that people are kind of rediscovering that space as a place to learn and engage with others. And I think that's part of what makes it work.
Who is your guys' demographic when it comes to bringing people in as the people you're working with and mentoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our work, I kind of talked about the three focus areas: community building, sustainable agriculture, and youth development. And one or more of those kind of is always at play with the people that we work with. Our work is extremely partnership oriented. It's a core value of ours that we believe that we do more by partnering with others and working together. And so that kind of runs through all of our work. And to that end, Trellis for Tomorrow's work is really like a distributive model. So we're looking for partnerships everywhere that we go. We're looking to establish a connection and a collaboration wherever we go. So one of our biggest programs, when I talk about the 35 gardens across 5 counties, those all represent partnerships that we've established with organizations as a part of the Food for All network of gardens. So the Food for All program, and I promise I'm getting to answer your question, is basically we look for these types of partnerships, and it can be with any kind of organization. It can be with a business, a corporation, it can be with a prison or a youth center, it can be with a community-focused group like a community center, or it can be with a faith-based group, a school, a university. Anybody that has kind of any touch or reach into the community that's interested in having a garden, we would have this conversation with. And if they've got space for a garden or hydroponics, because that's now something we're getting into, if they have a space for either a garden or for hydroponics, if they've got people that they serve and would be available, they're pretty much a good candidate for the Food for All program. And so those 35 gardens are partners with all of those types of different places. So we work with faith-based groups, community-focused groups, prisons, schools, universities, corporations, and we put the gardens in location. They bring the people power, we bring the expertise, and make sure that the gardens basically have the backbone to work, and they take care of the gardens and make sure the food gets to where it needs to go. And so that's the 1,000 volunteers across a lot of different spaces. So we have lots of different partners and lots of different partner types across that network. And then with our youth programs, I think we're a little bit more focused. So, years ago we had a program where we would invite kids basically from their communities out to farms, and we would use those farms as educational spaces to teach them workforce readiness skills and behavioral skills, life skills, and that connection to where our food comes from. And just before the pandemic, it turned out to be a fortunate sort of thought process. We started to question the model. What if we flipped the script? What if instead of taking the kids out of their communities to the farms, what if we tried to take the farms into their communities? What would happen if we flipped that around? And so we tried out a program which is now in its 8th year, where we do exactly that. We establish gardens in the kids' communities and use those as a space to do our programming with them during the summer, teach the kids how to manage those gardens, and get the food to the people that need it in those communities. And that's been kind of revolutionary for our programming. And so for that particular program, the students that we're working with, the youth that we're working with, are largely coming from communities that don't have a lot of access to nutrient-dense food, or have struggled to sort of get to where the food is. So we're talking about, in many cases, working with young people that are underserved or underrepresented and don't have the kind of access that many other people enjoy. And so that's the demographic that we're working with a lot of our youth programs.
So it's almost like you guys are just creating a hub, like, hey, this garden is a spot where volunteers can come in, students can come in, and you're kind of just managing that to oversee how all those different pieces come together.
That's such a great way to put it. And, really kind of using this garden as a space where people can come together in every way possible, not just to grow food, but to grow in community. And we start with the young people, and as they get more familiar with what they're doing, they're learning leadership skills, business skills, how to manage the garden. And our ultimate vision really is that these gardens would slowly become community-based assets that the community sees as their own. and we'll have more level of investment into basically one of the things we like to say around Trellis is lead and feed themselves into the future. That's what we're trying to sow seeds for, that they would lead and feed themselves into the future. So it's kind of the old maxim of, give a man a fish or teach a man to fish, except we're doing it with, eggplants and carrots and zucchini and stuff like that. So, but that's a great way to think about it, as like hubs that people are coming together around.
And for distribution, I guess you guys are kind of just setting up different people who can use things and come pick it up, or do you guys do you have like a storage facility? Do you can stuff? Like how does that work?
Absolutely. So part of our model, with most of the gardens throughout our broader network, one of the things that we've done over the years that we've had that program is we've identified, I said we've got about 35 gardens in the network. There's about 50 food pantries or food banks across that same region that we've identified. We know when they're open, what they need, what they prefer. Do they like their produce washed? Do they like it bagged? Whatever it is. And so when any partner comes into our Food for All network and has a garden, we immediately connect them with 4 or 5 or more agencies that are immediately in their area with all of that information, and basically say, your job is to grow the food and harvest it, and your job is to get it to one of these places. So at least 50% of everything that's grown in those gardens gets to one of those agencies. And basically what we're doing is we're facilitating that connection, that community connection between the gardeners and those agencies themselves. So Trellis kind of takes ourselves out of the middle and facilitates that strength, that bond within community to take place. And another thing I'll just say that is so strong about this model is, most of the produce that food pantries and food banks get is 4 weeks from when it was harvested, 2,000 miles from where it was harvested, and it's passed through 2 or 3 sets of hands in the process. And at Trellis for Tomorrow, a big thing for us is 24 and 24. So less than 24 miles from where it was harvested, less than 24 hours from when it was harvested, we're getting it to people that need it. And what we've heard back from those agencies and food banks is that it's not just a game changer, but it's like Christmas morning when our produce shows up, because the quality is so outstripping everything else that they see, that there's a lot more dignity. People feel like they're cared for when they get the produce that come from our gardens.
How much produce is one of these gardens producing?
It really varies. So the smallest garden in our Food for All network is about 6 beds, and any one bed, if it's in high production, which is kind of our model, will produce about 100 to 125 pounds of produce per year. So each garden bed produces about that much. So a small garden might produce, 600 or 750 pounds of produce during a growing season. But some of our bigger gardens are at 9 or 10,000 pounds a year. So it's like a small farm in some cases, where we've got 150 beds in a single garden that's just kind of growing an incredible amount for the local community. And I'll just make one more comment to say that with our youth gardens, part of their work is to design enterprises that get the produce into the community. So they're a little different. They come up with mechanisms to get the produce delivered to their own community. So one year the kids came up with like a subscription model. It's like Netflix, but instead of bad content, you're getting good produce. And like people sign up door to door, and then the kids would bag up the produce that they know each person, each household wants, and then they would deliver it to their door. In the last couple of years, they started building like produce stands where people can come and basically shop on given days of the week that they know the kids are going to stock the stands with fresh produce. But with each of those models, with the kids, there's what's called a dignified exchange model, and that's something that the kids coined themselves, which is basically saying, for the produce coming out of our youth gardens, it can't be free. There's too much work that goes into it to say that it's free, and that's a little bit more to give it away as more of a charity model, and the kids are interested in a solidarity model. And so basically you got to give something. It doesn't have to be whole food prices. Maybe it is for some people that can afford it. But whether it's money or a recipe or giving some of your time back in volunteering in the garden, whatever it is, there has to be an exchange for that produce. And that's something that our students are trying to build into that work with the communities they live in.
It's very interesting. Do you guys have a plan to continue scaling? Like, what's your kind of vision in the next phase as you continue to grow the nonprofit?
Yeah, so I think that we're still growing with the garden models throughout the 5 counties that we serve. We might even get into some additional counties, but that's a question that we're exploring right now. Like, how much bigger would we want to get, or would we want to kind of build this out as a kind of a franchise? Would we want to make this a model that other people could replicate rather than something that we need to do ourselves? Because we certainly have over the course of almost 25 years, like really sussed out where the pain points are and where the snags are. And I personally wouldn't have a problem sharing that knowledge and that information if we could see community growing in other places this way. We don't need to be the ones to do it. But what I will say is one of the areas that I do think that we're growing quite a bit is kind of a pipeline for the young people coming through our programs to have opportunities to either be on staff or in leadership within Trellis for Tomorrow, or to start their own enterprises with our support, and to think about other ways that they could enter into somewhere into the food system or adjacent to have an impact. Because that's one thing I think that young people get surprised by. Like, a lot of kids come in at 13, 14 and say, I just want to be a game designer. But by the time they're leaving our program, they're like, I can see how those skill sets that I have and want to explore have a place to solving problems in my community in and around the food system. So we see that change happening over time. And I think that one of the biggest areas that we're going to continue growing is how we connect those young people with opportunities downstream.
What are some of the challenges you guys have as an organization?
The weather, groundhogs, some of the normal things that you might run into with trying to grow food, because we are basically a non-certified organic operation. We run into all of the kind of pest and problems that you run into trying to grow food. And we're also trying to teach those skills to 1,000 people across 5 counties. So the logistics involved with getting all of those resources to those gardens and doing education on the ground and making sure that we're kind of raising up a volunteer corps that really know what they're doing and feel equipped is a challenge, but a meaningful one that we feel really good about. And I think that we're kind of competing with a lot of different things that are vying for our young people's attention. So, fortunately, as our programs have grown and they become more successful, what I'll say that I didn't mention before is that our youth programs are paid workplace opportunities for the kids. So we find grant funds and other donations. If you're out listening to this and you want to donate, we would love to get some individual donation support for what we're doing. But we use funds that we find to basically pay the kids for that learning experience. So, staying solvent and making sure that we're finding the funding is a challenge. The success of the program has helped us overcome some of the other things that are vying for kids' attention and time. But other than that, I said earlier on that one of the best things that can grow in a community garden is community itself. And the obstacles that we see all around us right now that are keeping us from working and living and growing in community is probably one of the bigger challenges. People don't know how to cooperate or how to communicate. And so we do a lot of work to, talk about how do we make this an engaging space? How can we share this space despite our differences? How can we learn more about each other within this space? But I would say our biggest challenges are, how do we stay solvent? How do we find the funds to continue doing this incredible work? And then how do we deal with the underground legions of groundhogs that want to find out where all our gardens are and eat all our food? But
Do you guys have an off season in the winter, or do you do greenhouses? How do you treat cold weather?
yeah, so we have an agricultural learning center that we've just been establishing for the last 18 months at Lundale Farm. So Trellis for Tomorrow has a new space that's been set up there, and I think in the future that's going to become kind of a destination for learning. And that's a 4,000 square foot greenhouse, about a third of which we use to grow all of the seedlings to support those gardens. So we grow about 100,000 seedlings every year that get out into the community. But the rest of that greenhouse and farm space that we have at Lundale is like a kind of playground meets classroom meets Willy Wonka meets organic produce, not chocolate. So we have hydroponic grow stations all throughout the greenhouse. We will be doing aquaponics more in the future. And then there's lots of other sort of modules where we're teaching people how to grow food 4 seasons a year. So that's a 4-season grow operation. But largely speaking, March, well, I should say February to November is like when we're in the field and we're doing a lot of work. And the December, January, we're basically behind the scenes doing a lot of planning, coordinating with all of our partners, saying what worked, what didn't work, how can we improve? Because we're a nonprofit and we're funded through grants from foundations and from government entities. We do a tremendous amount of data tracking and reporting. What difference is this making? We have to do lots of measurement and surveys. And so December and January, February is when we make all the adjustments we need to do, kind of report out on what we did last year and make improvements, and then we start all over again.
That's great. If anybody wants to get in touch with you guys or learn more, what's the best way to do that?
You can definitely follow us on social. So we're Trellis for Tomorrow. That's Trellis, Trellis for Tomorrow. Or you can go to trellisfortomorrow.org, which is our website. So that's Trellis, the number 4, tomorrow.org. So check us out online or follow us on social. There's a lot of volunteering opportunities at Lundale and other spaces. So we've got all sorts of mechanisms for people to get connected with us, either whether they're just looking for information about our work, or if they're looking to volunteer, or if they're looking for an outlet or an avenue for giving and for supporting work that's making a difference in the community. We've got ways for that too.
Great. Well, David, thanks so much for coming on the show today. And looking forward to see how Trellis continues growing.
Been a total pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Of course.
Thank you.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.